Revenge with Karen.
You want what? Brent asked, blinking like she'd just requested naming rights to his firstborn. Equity? He glanced around the boardroom, smirking at the other suits like Ava had told a joke no one else understood. Ava, come on. This isn't a charity. You're lucky we keep you around. It hit her like a slap. Not the words, really, she'd had worse in junior roles, but the smugness behind them. Casual confidence of a man who thought smiling while insulting you made it less insulting. Ava sat there, hands folded on a yellow legal pad, taking it. She didn't flinch, didn't speak. Just gave him a slight nod and looked back down at her notes. The conference room went quiet for a beat, just the hum of the HVAC and the faint clink of someone stirring coffee in a ceramic mug. He didn't stop. Let's be honest, he chuckled, flipping to the next page in the meeting packet. Your operations glue. Important, yes, but not exactly growth fuel, right? We need to reserve shares for people bringing in capital or pushing product velocity. Not, compliance stuff. There it was. Compliance stuff. Like the endless 14-hour weeks she'd put in during the company's botched crypto pivot were just a hobby. Like negotiating with regulators, rewriting every single contract from the ground up, holding their heads above legal quicksand wasn't growth fuel. She blinked once, slow, said nothing. And if you looked close, really close, you'd have seen her left hand twitch toward the red folder in her bag. A thick one, tabbed, Sharpie labeled in fading ink, Continuity Docs Pivot V2, unopened since the scramble 2 years ago. And at that moment, still just a folder, still just paper. By the way, real quick, if you're into these kinds of stories where the quiet one turns out to be holding the detonator, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and give this a like. It seriously keeps the team going through the caffeine crashes and existential dread of content creation. All right, back to Ava. She sat through the rest of the meeting like a ghost. Notes taken, eyes neutral, tone polite. She even thanked Brent on her way out, voice like honey. That's what rattled him later, probably. She didn't fight, didn't plead, didn't even ask to revisit the equity conversation. Just smiled and said, of course. Thanks for the clarity, clarity. God, that word must have echoed in his head for weeks afterward. She returned to her desk and moved slowly, methodically. No tears, no drama. She drafted a resignation letter that sounded more like a spa cancellation. Thank you for the opportunity. I've decided to explore new challenges. Printed it, signed it, walked it upstairs. HR wasn't even back from lunch when she slid it under the glass door. Coworkers assumed she was just taking time off, maybe hitting that wellness retreat in Big Sur she always talked about. One even joked that she finally snapped and ran off to become a goat yoga instructor. Ava smiled, nodded, and said, maybe I did. She took only 2 things from her office, the plant her sister gave her last Christmas and that red folder. That night, she made a cup of peppermint tea, sat down at her kitchen table, and finally opened it. On page 7, paragraph 7, was a line she hadn't thought about in months, something she'd written at 2:13 a.m. during the chaos of relicensing. A legal patch for a leadership vacuum they'd been terrified would stall their funding round. A signature clause, one that made a single person responsible for continuity certification. One name, hers. She ran her finger along the margin. The ink was faded, but the clause was intact. No one had removed it. No one had reassigned it. And the kicker? The renewal date was approaching. 30 days. Tick, tick, she closed the folder, took a long sip of tea and smiled. It was the cleanest exit anyone at Verity Core had ever seen. No crying in the bathroom, no slamming drawers, no dramatic farewell lunch where coworkers pretend they'll miss you while secretly eyeing your ergonomic chair. Ava just disappeared. Her resignation email was 6 sentences long. No emojis, no keep in touch, just a time-stamped goodbye sent precisely at 8:01 a.m., 24 minutes before her formal departure meeting with HR. By the time anyone on the compliance team noticed her Slack icon had gone gray, she'd already turned in her badge, packed her desk into a single recycled Amazon box, and left behind a sticky note that read, Plant needs watering Thursdays. Thanks. The desk across from her, Pete, junior compliance analyst, fresh out of pen, glanced up as she passed and raised his brow. Vacation, he asked. Ava smiled, keys dangling from one hand, the other resting lightly atop the red folder. Something like that. Nobody thought to follow up. We're busy elbow-deep in due diligence audits ahead of the Series C. Brent had been barking at legal to get leaner, and everyone assumed Ava had just been another casualty of the thinning herd, either that, Or she'd finally taken that sabbatical she'd always mentioned, but never scheduled. One coworker even started a betting pool, for which coastal meditation commune she'd surface at first. While the office was still half asleep, and the espresso machine sputtered out its morning groans, Ava sat in the dim glow of her old workstation one final time. She logged in using muscle memory, fingers dancing across the keys, rhythm steady. Not rushed, not secretive. She opened the internal compliance vault and searched for one file in particular. The naming convention hadn't changed in 2 years. Continuity Compliance V2.1. DocX last modified, June 12th. By her, she clicked download, saved it to a small encrypted flash drive, ejected, wiped the search history. No one saw, no one asked, and why would they? She wasn't IT, wasn't engineering. Just operations glue, remember? As if the glue didn't know exactly which seams had been haphazardly duct-taped shut and which ones were holding the entire house together. Downstairs, Brent was laughing with 2 investors in the glass-walled cafe, smug and loose like a man who thought all fires were safely put out. Ava passed behind him without turning her head, walked straight through the revolving door, and didn't glance back once. Out on the street, the fall breeze bit against her coat. She zipped it up, adjusted the red folder under her arm, and headed toward the subway like it was just another Wednesday. Back at Verity Core, Brent's voice boomed through the open-plan floor. No more dead weight. This is our growth era. He said it to the room, not to anyone in particular, like a preacher screaming at drywall. People laughed politely. No one noticed the compliance system had already logged Ava out. No one noticed the folder on her desk was gone. By 2 p.m., her name had been scrubbed from the org chart. The tech team reassigned her login credentials to a generic compliance shell account with limited permissions. The plan was to redistribute her tasks across the junior analysts until we find someone cheaper who can do the same work. Only, they never really understood what she did. Not fully. They thought her job was paperwork. They forgot she wrote the paperwork. At home, Ava placed the folder on her coffee table, right beside a stack of legal pads and a half-burned candle. She booted up her personal laptop, inserted the flash drive, opened the document she hadn't touched in over 700 days. There it was again, paragraph 7, short, unassuming, no bold text, no highlighter. But within it sat a trigger waiting to be tripped. One that didn't need sabotage, didn't need revenge, just neglect. She clicked print, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt like she could finally breathe. The file opened with a mechanical groan from her aging laptop, like even the machine knew it was unearthing something that should have stayed buried. Ava leaned back in her chair, cradling a chipped mug of chamomile, and stared at the first page. Continuity Compliance V2.1. DocX, it had that bureaucratic rot smell, digital dust from a document no one had reviewed in ages. Header still bore the logo from their old brand identity, the blue swirl they ditched during the fintech pivot when some marketing savant declared it too medical. The irony? That swirl had been slapped on every state and federal document they filed during the relicensing storm. It was a ghost they couldn't scrub. She scrolled. Slowly. Pages of jargon spilled out like concrete. Licensing triggers, data locality clauses, contractual freeze conditions. He remembered writing this in a caffeine-fueled haze, during a month when half the executive team had vanished into strategy retreats, while the compliance department duct-taped the company's legitimacy back together. Page 4. Nothing. Page 5. Procedural boilerplate. Page 6. Her own notes inserted as comments still visible in the margin. She smiled faintly at one. Fix this before legal sees IT. All caps. 3 exclamation points. Classic Panikira Ava. Then came page 7. Paragraph 7. She stopped scrolling. The clause wasn't flashy. Just 4 lines, buried under the section Header Continuity Oversight Protocol. No one in the boardroom would have remembered it. Brent certainly hadn't. But she did. In the event of a transition or unplanned gap in executive or compliance leadership, all active regulatory authorizations shall remain valid only upon annual certification by the originally named compliance officer. Certification must be executed and logged no later than 365 days following the last signed compliance cycle. Failing this, regulatory status may lapse without notice. Plain language, no legalese, because back then they were in a panic and needed to move fast, and they never updated it. She was still the originally named compliance officer. She was the one who signed the last cycle. And now, Thanks to Brent's performance in that boardroom, she wouldn't be signing the next 30 days. The countdown had already started. Ava reached for a pen out of habit, but stopped short. She didn't need to write anything, didn't need to log into their systems, didn't need to lift a damn finger. Paragraph 7 didn't require action, it only needed absence. It wasn't a lever, it was gravity. The kind of thing that kept pulling until something cracked. They had no clue. She pictured the boardroom again, Brent's smug laugh echoing off the glass walls, the VP of marketing nodding like a bobblehead. The way he'd used the phrase operations glue like it was a compliment, right before wiping her off the table like lint. Funny thing about glue, rip it out too fast, the whole thing comes apart. She closed the document without saving. There was nothing to change. The fuse had been lit 2 years ago. Brent had just yanked the pin out of the grenade and asked for applause. She didn't feel triumphant. Not yet, just quiet, steady, the kind of silence that hums in your bones before a thunderstorm. Later that night, as the rain tapped against her windows and her inbox filled with the usual spam from wellness newsletters and 10% off codes for work clothes she'd never need again, Ava sat cross-legged on her rug and read paragraph 7 aloud. It sounded almost boring, and that made it perfect. Let them pop champagne over Series C. Let them drink to cutting the fat and pat themselves on the back for streamlining ops. Let them forget that one file, one line, one name still held their regulatory leash. She wasn't going to email anyone, wasn't going to leak documents or make threats. She was going to wait, let the rules do what they were written to do. The steak was medium rare, the wine was older than most of the interns, and Brent was positively glowing under the low amber light of the city's most insufferably exclusive rooftop restaurant. Somewhere between the Wagyu Carpaccio and the overpriced truffle foam, he stood up, glass in hand, and gave the kind of toast that made Ava's stomach turn, even from 10 miles away. To growth, he said, always syrupy and drunk on his own importance. To clarity, to knowing when to let go of what's holding you back. There was polite laughter. Then he really leaned in. Sometimes you've got to cut loose the dead weight, trim the legacy baggage, you all know what I mean. Forks clinked against plates, a few eyebrows raised. One junior exec gave a knowing chuckle. Brent didn't say her name. He didn't need to. Ava knew how men like him operated, leave the specifics out. Let the crowd fill them in. That way, it's never slander, just team bonding. Across town, Ava watched it unfold in 20-second bursts on Instagram stories and LinkedIn posts masquerading as career blessings. The backdrops were the same. Rooftop skyline, too dark to see entrees, faces mid-laugh behind tall wine glasses. But the captions told a different story. Big moves with the best team, $100M just the beginning. Let's go. Grateful for visionary leadership. Series C #dealflow blessed Ava sipped her chamomile and smiled. Not bitterly, not gleefully. Just amused. They were celebrating like the ink was dry. Like the money was already wired. Like the firm buying them out hadn't scheduled their final compliance verification call for the following Thursday. She still had the due diligence checklist on her laptop from an old consulting gig. She knew how it worked. The acquiring firm would scan every file, every certification, every last signature down to the damn notary seal. And somewhere near the top of that list, highlighted, underlined, bolded, would be the regulatory continuity certification. The one nobody at Verity Core had filed. The one only Ava could sign. And the deadline was now just under 3 weeks away. Let them toast. Let them leak details to Tech Circle and whisper to reporters about buyout multipliers and synergies. Let Brent sit at the head of the table, bragging about how he'd reshuffled the team just in time to impress the new overlords. Ava had seen the pitch deck that landed them the meeting. Half the numbers were speculative, and the rest were built on sand. But regulators didn't care about pitch decks. They cared about signatures. Verity Core was walking into a $100M handshake with no legal floor under their feet. Back at the party, someone posted a boomerang of champagne flutes clinking together under string lights. Ava watched it on loop, the hollow clink repeating like a warning bell. She thought of the red folder, now locked in her home filing cabinet, and the line in paragraph 7 that made the company's regulatory standing expire, automatically, 30 days after the last sign-off. No alerts, no fanfare, just quiet expiration, like a candle slowly suffocating in a sealed jar. At the party, Brent wrapped an arm around the VP of Finance and whispered something that made her laugh too loud. Another photo was snapped. Another caption drafted. Meanwhile, a back-end compliance timer ticked down with no eyes on it. No safety net. No contingency plan. Just arrogance and ignorance in a neat little handshake. Ava shut her laptop. She didn't need to watch anymore. She didn't need to do anything. They'd built a rocket ship out of wet cardboard and told the press it was titanium. And all she had to do was let them launch. 30 days is longer than you think when you're waiting for everything to fall apart. The first week passed like a Sunday hangover. Everyone at Verity Core was too busy patting themselves on the back to notice the knife slowly turning behind them. Brent flew to Austin for investor synergy workshops, which mostly meant golf and Instagram reels. Legal was swamped with Q4 cleanup. HR was trying to quietly backfill Ava's role with a more agile resource from a consulting firm that didn't know an SEC clause from a Chick-fil-A receipt. Meanwhile, Ava was learning how to breathe again. Not metaphorically. Literally. She'd signed up for a yoga class at a studio that smelled like eucalyptus and old wood. The instructor had a voice like warm molasses and wore a shirt that said "Let that SHT go" in soft cursive. Ava nearly laughed the first time she walked in, but she kept going. The class met at 10 a.m. every Tuesday and Friday, right about the time Brent's calendar was usually jammed with all-hands calls and capital pre-briefs. While he was busy flexing for his new PE suitors, Ava was in a sunlit room full of ex-lawyers, burned-out execs, one surprisingly limber grandfather who used to run freight logistics for the Navy. By week 2, the knot in her chest had unwound. Her breathing slowed. She started sleeping through the night, and all the while the clock ticked. Paragraph 7 wasn't designed to punish. It wasn't even malicious. It was just protocol, a continuity clause that required someone, anyone, to reauthorize the company's compliance standing annually. And it had always been her name on the... Now it was day 26. She marked it with a smiley face on her fridge calendar, not a gloating one, just a simple yellow dot that meant something was nearing completion. Somewhere in the background, the state system was already stirring. It was fully automated, designed to flag silent lapses and queue up revocation notices to registered vendors. It didn't ask questions, didn't wait for human error to be corrected. It just ran like clockwork. Day 28. She went for a walk along the river and bought herself a cinnamon roll the size of a hubcap. Day 29. She binged a documentary about butterfly migration and fell asleep halfway through the episode on environmental collapse. She never made it to the part where the host tried to be optimistic. Day 30. She woke up before her alarm. No particular reason, just a twitch of instinct. She padded into the kitchen, made coffee, stared out the window at the quiet street below. Everything looked normal, peaceful, ordinary. But somewhere deep in a government server, a box went unchecked. A red flag flipped, and a quiet process began. The first call came that afternoon. It wasn't Brent, of course not. He was too insulated, too cushioned by people whose jobs revolved around telling him everything was fine. No, the first voice was smaller, familiar, nervous. "Hey, Ava, it's Pete," from the team. She recognized the panic instantly. "There's something weird going on with the partner portals. A few of our third-party vendors got kicked out of their access dashboards this morning. Like everything's locked. Legal's freaking out, and IT says nothing's changed on our end." She kept her voice calm. That's strange." "Yeah," Pete stammered. "Do you think this could be like a license thing? I mean, did you guys submit the new compliance cert before?" Ava didn't answer right away. "Just let the silence hold. I'm not sure," she finally said. "You might want to check paragraph 7. "Paragraph what?" But Ava had already ended the call. She took another sip of coffee. Her hands didn't shake. Her breathing was steady. The document was still untouched. The clause was still active. And Verity Core was now officially skating on legal ice so thin it didn't even crack, it just vanished. No alarms had gone off. No drama. No headlines. Not yet. But the systems knew. And soon, the people would too. It started with a flutter. A quiet morning email, overlooked by most, lost in the avalanche of unread threads titled Urgent and Follow Up. But this one was different. It came from the state's automated regulatory system and hit dozens of Verity Core's third-party vendors simultaneously. Subject: License Status Update. Regulatory certification lapse, immediate suspension of trading authority. The vendors didn't wait to react. By 8:47 a.m., 5 of them had already locked down their API keys. By 9:03, scheduled jobs began to fail, silent, then sudden. The dashboard at Verity Core's back-end monitoring center lit up like a Christmas tree in a haunted house. Red, 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 connection timeout. Unauthorized token. Access revoked. By 9:12, the partner success manager was sprinting barefoot across the open floor, screaming for someone, anyone, from DevOps. Half the engineers hadn't even finished their coffee. The one guy who did know how the monitoring tools worked was still out sick with COVID, and the other had just joined 3 days ago and was still figuring out how to log into Slack. In the war room, the CFO slammed her palm against the glass table. How the hell did we lose trading authority across 5 vendors in 15 minutes? No one had answers. Brent wandered in at 9:18, holding his daily green juice and a Bluetooth headset still chirping hold music from his earlier call with the PE firm's junior associate. "What's going on?" he asked, eyebrows lifting as he scanned the room. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke. At 9:20, Eagle opened a shared drive labeled Compliance Manual Archive and began digging. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. Every lawyer in that room had the same sick suspicion forming in their gut. This wasn't a cyber attack. This wasn't a DNS failure. This was procedural. One by one, third-party portals locked out Verity Core's access. Payment processing froze. Partner accounts flagged for noncompliance. Even the internal dashboard, once the beating heart of Brent's empire, blinked into a screen that read, "Authorization required." Signatory validation expired. They tried to override the access locally. No luck. They called the state's helpline. "Please be advised," came the pre-recorded voice, "if a continuity certification has lapsed, only the previously registered signatory may refile Form 11B to restore standing." The CFO nearly choked. "Who's the signatory?" Legal didn't answer, just projected the clause on the wall. Paragraph 7. All compliance continuity shall be certified annually by the last authorized compliance officer of record. There it was. In plain black letters. Brent's face drained of color. "Wait, who wrote that clause?" he asked. One of the junior counsels looked up from his laptop, pale as printer paper. "Ava, 2 years ago, during the licensing sprint." Brent's voice sharpened. "Well then, get her to sign it." Eagle didn't move. "Why are you just sitting there? Get her on the damn phone." But they all knew what he didn't. Because at 9:42, Ava's official LinkedIn status had updated to exploring new opportunities, and she wasn't answering calls. Someone tried to reset her access credentials, but her email was already scrubbed. Her account terminated. The flash drive she used had been personal, encrypted, and never connected to the company network. Systems weren't broken. They were doing exactly what they were built to do. Paragraph 7 had matured. No action, no override, no shortcut, just silence and collapse. Ava, meanwhile, was in the corner booth of a quiet cafe uptown, sipping coffee and working her way through a crossword puzzle she hadn't had time for in years. Across from her, the TV on mute played a breaking news ticker. Verity Core temporarily suspends trading amid internal licensing review. No alarms, no explosions, just gravity. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just circled a 6-letter word. Absent. The office felt like a funeral parlor dressed up in startup drag. Tension clung to the walls like old coffee stains, sour and permanent. Phones rang unanswered. Slack channels that once buzzed with useless gifs and fake hustle quotes now sat hollow, filled only with timestamps and confused silence. Partner success team had stopped pretending they were handling it. The dashboard was still frozen. Payment routing, dead. Compliance status, in limbo, and all fingers pointed inward. In a windowless side room, someone finally remembered the old compliance manual. It was the intern, actually. A wiry kid from Northwestern who barely spoke during meetings and usually wore the same 3 hoodies on rotation. He typed continuity into the document archive. Hit enter. Opened a Word file with a name no one had touched in 729 days. Continuity Compliance v2.1. DocX. He scrolled, squinting at the blocky text, skipped past the boring stuff. Then he stopped. Paragraph 7. He didn't understand what it meant, not exactly. But he understood the weight of it. Understood that it named someone, explicitly. He tapped the glass wall, gently. I think you guys need to see this." 10 minutes later, Eagle was packed into the room, staring at a projector screen like it had just delivered a death sentence. All active regulatory certifications must be renewed annually by the last approved compliance officer of record, unless otherwise reassigned in writing and acknowledged by the compliance board. The name on record remains Ava Martinez. No reassignment letter existed. No override had ever been proposed. No backup had been filed. Digital systems all pointed to the same reality. Ava had been the keystone. And now she was gone. What the hell is this? Brent barked, shoving past the glass door. His face was flushed, eyes wild. You're telling me one damn clause, is what brought the company to a standstill? The GC didn't look up from the document. It's not just a clause. It's the only thing holding your license together. Brent jabbed a finger toward the screen. She did this on purpose. Beat passed. Then finally the GC spoke, calm, flat, unshakable. No, she didn't, you did. The room froze. She wrote that clause during the relicensing scramble, because you refused to hire a deputy compliance officer, because you wanted to cut costs and consolidate authority under one name. We all signed off on it. You signed off on it. Brent's mouth opened, then closed. No words. She left. You didn't update the documentation, didn't reassign certification. You didn't even read the manual. He turned to the CFO, searching for backup, but she just stared down at the conference table, jaw tight, fingers balled into a fist. At 11:08 a.m., the first investor pulled out. It wasn't a scream or a storm. Just an email with the subject line, Notice of Withdrawal Pending Compliance Review. No call, no explanation. Just a PDF with legalese and a politely brutal subtext. We don't buy chaos. Brent's phone buzzed, then again, then again. Investor relations was drowning in voicemails. Journalists had caught wind of a regulatory hiccup. The PE firm's rep, the one Brent had toasted with 3 nights ago, had suddenly gone dark. Not even a read receipt. The floor under Brent's feet didn't collapse. It evaporated. He turned to legal again. Can't we just update the clause? Sign it retroactively? The GC didn't even answer that one. Instead, she asked quietly, do you know where Ava is? He didn't respond. Someone in the room cleared their throat. She posted a picture this morning. Looks like she's upstate, hiking. Another voice chimed in, half horrified, half impressed. She turned off commenting. Smart move. Because nothing they typed now, no apology, no offer, no Hail Mary, was going to change what that document said. Ava's name was etched in the foundation. And they'd built the whole house with no idea where the support beam was. By the next morning, the vultures had smelled blood. Not the subtle kind, the kind that drenched headlines and bled into inboxes like someone had left the compliance sluice gate open. The $100M private equity deal was now on hold pending legal clarification, which is code for never happening, but we're too polite to say it yet. Internally, Verity Core was hemorrhaging credibility faster than it was losing access tokens. The CEO of one client, a risk-averse hedge fund, fired off a terse email. We consider your lapse a breach of SLA. Full refund expected. 4 others followed. 2 requested third-party audits. 1 asked for a complete data export before reassessing the partnership. But the real detonation came at 3:47 p.m. That's when Tech Sleuth, niche but savage industry blog known for dragging VC darlings through the mud, published a story titled, The $100M Deal Killed by Paragraph 7, How Verity Core Forgot Its Own Foundation. The article pulled no punches. It outlined the entire meltdown, starting with Ava's quiet departure, Brent's public toast, the blackout morning, and finally, the unfiled clause that had taken down a would-be unicorn, even linked to a PDF of the compliance document, complete with the highlighted clause naming Ava as the sole renewal signatory. No sabotage, no whistleblower, just one woman doing her job and one company too arrogant to think it needed her to keep breathing. The piece went viral within hours, not just among fintech nerds and legal wonks, but on LinkedIn, Twitter, even TikTok. A clip of Brent raising his champagne glass was now ironically overlaid with the phrase, when you cut the glue, the house falls. The meme economy moved faster than the lawyers. Paragraph 7 started trending by midnight. Ava, meanwhile, was standing in line at the DMV. She was holding a small number ticket, B124, and had been waiting for nearly 45 minutes to update the address on her license. Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket for the 3rd time, but she didn't look at it right away. DMV floors have that effect on people, grimy existential resignation and cheap linoleum existentialism. But when she finally pulled the phone out, her lock screen lit up with a notification from a friend. Dude, you broke Tech Sleuth. Ava blinked, opened the article, scanned the first paragraph, then the second, paused. She scrolled down until she hit the line that quoted paragraph 7 in full. The same clause she'd written during a panic-fueled night, fueled by gas station coffee and spite. The DMV number board flipped, now serving B123. Ava smiled, just slightly, not smug, not vengeful, just settled. The kind of smile you give when the truth finally speaks louder than your exit ever could. Her phone vibrated again. Brent mobile, she declined. 2 minutes later, it rang again. Brent work decline, again. This time, unknown caller. She locked the screen. B124 popped up on the board. She stepped forward, phone still in hand, article still open in the browser. And for the first time in 5 years, she was the one holding something the CEO wanted. The line clerk at the window barely looked up. Name, Ava Martinez. The woman typed it in. Updating address? Yup. She pulled out a new lease, lit it across the counter. The clerk stamped something official. Ava looked down at her phone once more, just long enough to see the article's view count tick up past 150,000. The company hadn't collapsed. Not yet, but the iceberg had surfaced, and the bow was already splitting. The boardroom was silent, save for the low whir of the HVAC and the occasional cough from someone too exhausted to stifle it. Every eye in the room was bloodshot. Nobody had slept. Not Brent, who looked like a man recently exercised. Not the CFO, who hadn't spoken above a whisper in 12 hours. Not legal, who sat motionless, hands folded like they were praying to a god they'd only just realized existed. Ava Martinez. The digital whiteboard still showed the grim bullet points. Buyer withdrew, vendor freeze ongoing, refund liabilities escalating, tech sleuth now running a follow-up titled Glue Girl. The compliance officer who brought down a unicorn, paragraph 7 trending on Twitter. Again. The chair of the board, a woman known for turning billion-dollar companies into trillion-dollar ones without ever raising her voice, finally spoke. Quiet, crisp, get her back, fix this. No one argued. There was no but or what if, just 3 heads nodding like school kids who'd been caught cheating on a group project by the principal, the superintendent, and God. By noon, a formal re-engagement offer had been drafted. Ava received it in her inbox at exactly 12:03 p.m. The subject line was absurdly bland. Updated terms of opportunity. She clicked it anyway. The email was longer than necessary, like they thought verbosity could soften humiliation. It apologized formally, vaguely in that corporate language where nobody's really sorry, but everyone's terrified. It included an updated contract, 50% salary increase, fully backdated shares to her original request, 0.5%, just like she'd asked before Brent laughed her out of the room. Full signatory authority over all regulatory documents, compliance audits, and continuity protocols. In other words, please come back and plug the hole before we drown. Attached was a cover note, presumably from Brent himself. Ava, we understand now how critical you've always been to this company. We deeply regret how things unfolded. We hope you'll consider returning so we can move forward together. There was no I'm sorry, no ownership. Just that oily corporate desperation that oozes from people only after the walls start bleeding. Ava stared at the screen for a long time. Then, almost ceremonially, she reached for her tea. The mug had a chip on the rim. She sipped anyway. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad. She didn't reply. Not right away, not out of spite, but because it wasn't time yet. She wanted to sit with it. Let the weight of what they'd done and what she didn't do settle fully into the room. Because the truth was simple. She never sabotaged anything. She didn't raise her voice, storm out, didn't leak secrets or trash the company online. She wrote one clause, did her job, left when she wasn't respected, and the system handled the rest. She clicked the PDF to review the contract, read it line by line. It was perfect now, generous, deferential, airtight. Finally, she closed her laptop, eyes calm, face unreadable. And as the screen faded to black, her voice echoed, not out loud, but inward. Certain, final. Paragraph 7 wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. You just didn't respect it. You're the real stars of the corporate jungle. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, or I'll flick the switch on your old cubicle memories.